February 26, 1959. A search team finds a tent on a remote mountainside in the Soviet Ural Mountains. The tent has been slashed open from the inside. 9 sets of footprints lead away from the campsite, down the slope toward the forest. The searchers follow the tracks. What they find will haunt them for the rest of their lives. 2 bodies in their underwear, frozen beneath a cedar tree. 3 more scattered on the slope, trying to crawl back to the tent. And 4 others buried in a ravine, with injuries so severe they looked like victims of a car crash. No external wounds. No signs of an attack. No explanation for what made 9 experienced hikers cut their way out of their tent in the middle of the night and run barefoot into the freezing darkness. The Soviet government called it a compelling natural force. They closed the case after 3 months and sealed the files for decades. More than 60 years later, we still don't know what happened on that mountain. But the evidence they left behind tells a story of terror, survival, and something that should not have been there. On January 23, 1959, 10 university students gathered at the Ural Polytechnic Institute in Sverdlovsk, USSR, now Ekaterinburg, Russia. They were planning an ambitious winter expedition into the northern Urals, a trek classified as Category 3 difficulty, the highest and most dangerous rating. Category 3 meant temperatures dropping to minus 30 degrees Celsius, brutal winds, terrain that could kill the unprepared in hours. But this group wasn't unprepared. They were some of the most experienced ski hikers in the entire Soviet Union. The leader was Igor Dyatlov, 23 years old, an engineering student, radio enthusiast, and veteran outdoorsman. He had led expeditions like this before. He was meticulous, cautious, and respected by everyone who knew him. Yuri Doroshenko, 21, a 4th-year economics student, strong and athletic. Georgy Krivonichenko, 23, a civil engineer, experienced hiker, cheerful and optimistic. Zinaida Kolmogorova, 22, one of only 2 women in the group, a dedicated communist and skilled skier. Rustam Slobodin, 23, quiet, thoughtful, physically fit. Yuri Yudin, 21, the youngest of the group. Ludmila Dubinina, 20, the other woman passionate about hiking and photography. Alexander Kolevatov, 24, meteorology student, analytical mind. Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles, 23, a construction engineer with French ancestry. And Semyon Zolotaryov, 37, the oldest of the group, a World War II veteran working toward his ski instructor certification. He had fought the Nazis. He knew how to survive. Their destination was Gora Otorten, a mountain 200 miles north of Sverdlovsk. The plan was simple: a 14-day ski trek through the wilderness, reaching the summit and returning by February 12th. They left Sverdlovsk by train on January 25th. Parents and friends waved goodbye from the platform. No one suspected it would be the last time they'd see any of them alive. The first days of the trek went smoothly. The group traveled by truck to Vizhay, the last inhabited settlement before the wilderness. From there, they skied north through dense forest, following rivers and established trails. They documented everything. Dyatlov kept a detailed log. Several members carried cameras. Their photographs showed them laughing, joking, setting up camps, navigating through snow. They were in good spirits. On January 28th, Yudin turned back. He had developed severe back and leg pain and couldn't continue. The group helped him return to Vizhay, then continued without him. 9 hikers pushed forward into the mountains. Yudin would be the only survivor. By February 1st, the group had reached the eastern slopes of Kholat Syakhl, a Mansi name that translates to Dead Mountain. The indigenous Mansi people who lived in the region avoided this place. They considered it sacred and dangerous. The hikers didn't share these superstitions. At around 5 p.m. on February 1st, Dyatlov made a decision that would later be questioned by every investigator. Instead of descending into the safety of the forest below, he ordered the group to make camp on the exposed mountainside. The slope was 30 degrees. No natural shelter. No trees to block the wind. Just open snow and freezing air. Why would an experienced leader choose such a dangerous location? The group's journals suggest they had accidentally veered off course and strayed west toward Dead Mountain. Rather than lose the altitude they had climbed, Dyatlov decided to camp where they were. They pitched their tent by cutting into the slope to create a flat platform. They secure it with ski poles and ropes. Inside, they laid down 9 backpacks, 9 pairs of boots, jackets, supplies. The last photograph taken that day shows the tent being set up. The western sky is dark. The wind looks brutal. That evening, the group wrote a satirical newsletter called Evening O Torton, a humorous newsletter they created to pass the time. The tone was lighthearted, joking. They were in good spirits. Sometime after midnight, something happened. The tent was found 25 days later with long slashes cut from the inside. Cuts made by someone desperate to escape. Forensic analysis confirmed it. The cuts were deliberate, made with a knife, and made by someone inside the tent. Whatever drove them out didn't come through the door. They cut their way through the walls and ran. When the group didn't return to Vizhay by February 12th as planned, their sports club assumed they were delayed by weather. Storms in the northern Urals could trap hikers for days. It wasn't unusual, but when February 20th passed, 8 days overdue, families demanded action. On February 20th, a search and rescue operation was launched. Students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute volunteered. Local authorities mobilized. Military helicopters joined the effort. They combed the forests, rivers, and slopes. On February 26th, a search team led by student Boris Slobtsov found the tent. It was partially buried in snow on the slope of Kholat Syakhl, about 1,000 feet below the summit. The entrance faced south. The northern side was covered with 15 to 20 centimeters of snow, not from an avalanche, but blown by wind. A pair of skis stuck out from the snow nearby. An ice axe lay at the entrance. Dyatlov's jacket was on the ground. Inside the tent, everything was still there. 9 backpacks, 9 pairs of boots, jackets, food, supplies, the stove, even a first aid kit, but no people. Footprints led away from the tent, heading northeast down the slope toward the forest. The tracks were analyzed carefully. They showed 8 or 9 people walking in single file, not running, walking in normal pace. Some were barefoot, some wore only socks. A few had one boot on or makeshift foot coverings. They were walking calmly into the freezing night, away from shelter and safety, toward the forest 1.5 kilometers away. On February 27th, searchers found the first 2 bodies beneath a large cedar tree at the edge of the forest. Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Krivonishenko were lying near the remains of fire. They were dressed in only underwear and socks. Their hands showed signs of attempting to climb the cedar tree. Branches were broken as high as 15 feet up, as if they were trying to see something or signal for help. Krivonishenko's mouth showed evidence that he had bitten off part of his own knuckle, possibly to stay awake or stifle pain. Both had died of hypothermia. Over the next few days, searchers found 3 more bodies between the cedar tree and the tent. They were positioned as if they had tried to return to the campsite, but didn't make it. Igor Dyatlov was found 300 meters from the cedar, lying face up with his hands clenched into fists in front of his chest. He had vomited blood. Zinata Komavarova was 630 meters from the cedar, frozen in a position suggesting she was crawling back toward the tent. Rustam Slobodin was found 480 meters from the cedar. He had a small skull fracture, but investigators determined hypothermia killed him, not the injury. All 3 had died trying to return to shelter. That left 4 bodies unaccounted for. Weeks passed. The snow began to melt. On May 4th, a Monsey hunter named Kurikov and his dog were searching the forest when they noticed cut branches forming a trail. They followed it 75 meters from the cedar tree and found something disturbing. A pair of black cotton sweatpants, the right leg cut off with a knife. A piece of women's brown wool sweater, cut in half with the sleeves removed. These belonged to Lyudmila Dubinina. The area had been searched before with avalanche probes, but the snow was deeper than expected. Searchers now realized the remaining 4 hikers must be buried beneath it. On May 5th, they found the last 4 bodies in a ravine beneath 4 meters of snow. The bodies were discovered lying in or near a makeshift snow den, a shelter they had dug into the ravine in an attempt to survive. This discovery changed everything. Lyudmila Dubinina, 20 years old. Cause of death: massive chest trauma. Her ribs on both sides were fractured. Hemorrhaging in the heart's right atrium. But there were no external wounds, no bruises, no cuts, nothing visible on the skin. She was also missing her eyes, part of her upper lip, soft tissue around her eyebrows, and her tongue. Semyon Zolotaryov, 37 years old. Cause of death: severe chest trauma. Multiple rib fractures on both sides. Massive internal hemorrhaging. Again, no external wounds. He was also missing his eyes. Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles, 23 years old. Cause of death: severe skull fracture. The bone had been compressed into his brain with such force that medical examiners compared it to the impact of a high-speed car crash. No external wounds. Alexander Kolevatov, 24 years old. Cause of death: hypothermia. He had a deformed neck and missing soft tissue, likely from decomposition. The medical examiner, Boris Vozrozdeny, was disturbed by what he found. In his report, he stated, "The nature of the injuries rules out the possibility that they were caused by another human being, because the force of the blows had been too strong and no soft tissue had been damaged." He compared the internal injuries to those of a person hit by a car traveling at high speed or thrown from a great height. But there were no broken bones in the arms, legs, or spine. No defensive wounds. No signs they had fallen from a cliff or been crushed by rockfall. Even stranger, when investigators examined the clothing worn by the 4 bodies in the ravine, they found something deeply unsettling. Several pieces of clothing tested positive for radiation. Not high levels, but detectable. The waistband of Krivonushchenko's sweater and the lower parts of his trousers showed radioactive contamination. So did some of Dubinina's clothing. On May 28, 1959, the official investigation concluded. The final report stated, "The cause of death was a compelling natural force which the hikers were unable to overcome. No suspects. No crime. Case closed." The files were classified and sent to a secret archive. They would remain sealed for nearly 30 years. When the case files were finally declassified in the 1990s, the world learned the full details of the Dyatlov Pass incident for the first time. And with those details came theories, dozens of them. Some plausible, some absurd, none of them perfect. The most recent official explanation, declared in 2020 by Russian prosecutors, is that a delayed slab avalanche caused the tragedy. According to this theory, when the hikers cut into the slope to pitch their tent, they destabilized the snow above them. Hours later, possibly triggered by strong katabatic winds carrying additional snow, a slab avalanche slid down over the tent. The rumbling, the pressure, the fear of being buried alive caused the hikers to panic. They slashed their way out and fled down the slope to what they thought was a safe distance. But there was no avalanche, just wind, fear, and a terrible miscalculation. Some died of hypothermia, trying to return to the tent. Others dug the snow den in the ravine for shelter, but collapsed on them, causing the catastrophic internal injuries. In 2021, Swiss researchers published a study in Communications Earth and Environment using computer models to demonstrate how a small slab avalanche could cause injuries matching those found on the bodies, without leaving traditional avalanche debris. But this theory has problems. The footprints leading away from the tent showed people walking calmly, not running in panic. The tent was still partially standing when searchers found it. If an avalanche had hit, it would have been flattened. And if the hikers fled because they feared an avalanche, why didn't they return once they realized there was no danger? Why walk 1.5 kilometers into the forest and stay there? Some researchers have proposed that infrasound, low-frequency sound waves below the range of human hearing, caused mass panic. Katabatic winds blowing across the mountain could have created infrasound vibrations. Studies show that infrasound can cause feelings of dread, anxiety, and irrational fear in humans. It's been linked to reports of hauntings and paranormal experiences. If the hikers were exposed to sustained infrasound, it might explain why they fled the tent in a state of panic, convinced something terrible was happening even though there was no visible threat. But this doesn't explain the severe internal injuries or the radiation. The area around Kolytsykel was not far from Soviet military testing sites. On the night of February 1st to 2nd, other hikers camped about 50 kilometers south reported seeing strange orange spheres glowing in the sky. Some have speculated the Dyatlov group was caught in a military accident, perhaps a missile test gone wrong, a parachute mine explosion, or exposure to chemical or biological weapons. This could explain the internal injuries, shockwave trauma, the radiation, weapons residue, and the government's decision to classify the case for decades. But there's no evidence, no records of military activity in that exact area. No shrapnel, no burns consistent with explosions. The most rational explanation combines known phenomena. As hypothermia sets in, victims experience paradoxical undressing, a bizarre sensation of overheating that causes them to remove clothing. This explains why Doroshenko and Krivonishenko were found in their underwear. The hikers may have fled the tent for a mundane reason. Perhaps they heard a noise, smelled something strange, or felt the tent was unsafe. Once outside in the cold, they couldn't return immediately. They built a fire. They dug a snow den. They tried to survive, but the snow den collapsed, either from structural failure or the weight of additional snow, crushing the 4 hikers inside and causing them massive internal injuries. Scavenging animals later removed the eyes and tongue from Dubinina and Zolotaryov's bodies. This theory is logical, but it still doesn't explain why experienced hikers would abandon a tent full of warm clothing and supplies, or why all 9 would leave together, or why they didn't return once the immediate danger passed. Some things about the Dyatlov Pass incident simply don't fit any theory. The radiation, the orange spheres reported in the sky, the fact that Zolotaryov fled with his camera but not his coat, as if he was documenting something, the strange injuries that looked like high-impact trauma but left no external marks. And then there's this, Lyudmila Dubinina's missing tongue. Medical examiners suggested it decomposed or was eaten by scavengers. But her tongue was removed cleanly, along with soft tissue in her mouth. Some investigators believe it was bitten off or removed while she was still alive. What could make someone bite off their own tongue? In 2013, Yuri Yudin, the only survivor, the man who turned back before the final leg of the journey, died at age 75. He spent the last 54 years of his life trying to understand what happened to his friends. He never found an answer. Today, a memorial stands near the site where the tent was found. The mountain pass is officially named Dyatlov Pass in honor of Igor Dyatlov and his team. Every year, hikers and researchers visit the site, retracing the steps of the doomed expedition. Some come looking for answers. Others come to pay their respects. 9 experienced hikers went into the Ural Mountains in February 1959. They documented their journey with photographs, journals, and meticulous records. They were prepared. They were cautious. They knew how to survive. And yet, something on Dead Mountain drove them out of their tent and into the freezing darkness. Was it an avalanche? A sudden panic induced by wind and sound? A military accident covered up by the Soviet government? Or was it something else? Something we still don't understand? The Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. And the 9 hikers who died there took the truth with them into the snow.